Hi class, this is our Module 9 lecture over delivering your speech. Today we're going to be going over different methods of delivery, your voice in delivery, and your body in delivery, and all the ways you can improve those things. Our pocket guide tells us that there are 4 keys to effective delivery. The first one is striving for naturalness. Next, we should show enthusiasm. We should project a sense of confidence, and we should try to engage directly with our audience members. There are 4 main methods of delivery. They are speaking from manuscript, emphasis on script there, speaking from memory, speaking impromptu, and speaking extemporaneously. Our first method of delivery that I want to go over is manuscript. This is reading a speech verbatim. So picture a high school book report or something, right? You've got your entire speech written out word for word like a script, right? Manuscript. And you're just reading it off of the piece of paper. Not very entertaining, right? This restricts your eye contact and body movement. Usually your hands are occupied with the piece of paper, and your eye contact is restricted because you're just constantly reading, right? This may also limit your vocal expressiveness because we don't typically read aloud like we talk in a normal conversation or in a presentation. So it can become monotonous and boring. It's definitely not the most entertaining or genuine form of speaking. Our next type is called speaking from memory. This is formally known as oratory. Remember that other word for rhetoric that the ancient Greeks and Romans used. And this is because back in those days and for a long time after that, people very rarely relied on written material at all. So they certainly weren't going to have any notes, any pieces of paper, or any chiseled stone to refer to. So they just memorized everything in their speech, word for word, even like long form poems like the Iliad, right? They just had all of it up in their head and they would recite it for large audiences. This is rarely used in the United States. We don't typically remember everything. We would rather have some notes or at least our outline or something to go off of. True eye contact with memorized speech is unlikely because you usually live so much up here trying to remember the next thing that you can be scanning the audience but never really making true eye contact with them, right? So it's less of an engaged eye contact. This invites a potential danger in the form of mental lapse. So if you have everything memorized and you're only going off of your memory, then if you forget one thing, then you're likely to forget everything else and sort of spin out of control and panic because what came next? What came next after that? And then you don't have that wealth of information and preparedness that you would have with extemporaneous speaking, for example. So we definitely don't want to rely on this type of memorized speech, especially when we have a pretty long and complicated speech to give to our audience. However, this can be appropriate for toasts and introductions, so quite a bit shorter speeches where it's okay to memorize these speeches and you can go ahead and practice them so much that this type of memorized speech can become delivered naturally. Up next, we have impromptu speaking, which is unpracticed or improvised speech. And this can be quite scary because it's delivered with relatively short notice. And I know for a lot of us, we'd rather be more prepared and we'd rather have gone over our speech a million times before actually delivering it. So what you should do in case of this situation is try to anticipate any impromptu speaking situations, right? If you are going to be honored in any way at an event, or if you're quite close to the person who's being honored, then maybe prepare some remarks beforehand, or just at least think about what you might say if you're called to speak. I know in that last bit I only mentioned kind of events that are social and fun, but this can also happen often in an educational or in a professional setting. So as you go through college, as you get your first job, you may be just randomly called on to present something that you've been working on. So always be prepared, and it's better to take this preparation of your public speaking skills seriously now so that you can fall back onto those in case you're unexpectedly called on to speak. Up next, we have the most relevant method of delivery for us, which is extemporaneous. Most speeches are delivered this way in the modern era, and especially in the United States. This is where you prepare well and practice in advance, but your speech is by no means completely memorized word for word. So you speak from an outline, you speak from prepared note cards that you've written key phrases and words on. And this method helps you adapt more to the situation based on something that happens during the presentation in the outside world. You can throw in extra context if you want. You can eliminate parts of your speech if you need to in the moment. You can just make those game time decisions that you might run into. And it also is just more flexible. If you, for some reason, forget a part of your speech and you need to just toss it away because you need to keep going in the presentation, then your wealth of knowledge about the topic that you already have, the amount of research and practice you've done for the presentation can sort of act as a safety net, and you can still keep going and your audience won't even notice that you messed up, right? However, there is still potential for a memory lapse in extemporaneous speaking, so you need to, of course, practice frequently using a speaking outline, and as I always recommend, having those little 4x6 or 3x5 note cards with little notes written on them to keep you on track. Often the first thing people recognize about your voice is the volume of it. This is the relative loudness of a speaker's voice. It's the most obvious vocal element. So if you're speaking too quietly, or if you're speaking too loud, projecting too much, then an audience is going to recognize that super quick and be like, whoa, what is she doing? So make sure that your volume is appropriate for the setting. Like I said, you should project your voice definitely, but certainly don't yell at them and certainly don't whisper, right? That can really throw an audience off. Experts tell us that the proper speech volume is somewhat louder than normal conversation. So I like to picture myself at a busy restaurant where there's like a lot of hustle and bustle, and so you need to project your voice a little bit more than if you were just talking in a quiet place with friends. Also, there's that image of the boardroom that we gave in the very first lecture, especially with mediated public speaking. So you don't want to be yelling at your computer monitor like a crazy person, but you do want to make sure that everyone can hear you. So picture yourself at the top of a boardroom. There's a long, shiny table, and people can be 15 or 20 feet away from you. You want to make sure that they can hear you at the end as well. And adjust your volume as needed. If people are looking confused or they're like leaning in to hear a little bit, just project your voice a little bit more or ask, can y'all hear me okay? Something like that. It can throw off your speech a little bit, but hopefully all those technicalities are worked out before you get up to speak. Let's now talk about the pitch of your voice. This is the range of sounds from high to low that your voice takes on as it's speaking, and it often affects the meaning of spoken words. However, a lot of voices naturally have a higher pitch, and a lot of voices have a naturally lower pitch. So sometimes you need to either adjust down or adjust up if your voice is overly high or overly low when you're public speaking in order to make your voice more projectable and more palatable to your audience's eardrums. Also, there is intonation, and this is very tied in with pitch. So this is the rising and falling of your vocal pitch as you speak, kind of like singing, how your voice goes up and down with the notes. And if you're public speaking correctly, then your voice is going to sound kind of musical and poetic in that way. And of course, different types of intonations convey different meanings. Like your voice goes up at the end of a question in order for your audience to know that you're asking them a rhetorical question. Your voice goes down and is a little bit more harsh and intense when you're talking about something sad or somber or serious. And your voice is happier sounding and upbeat and maybe even more lifted if you're talking about something more positive or optimistic, right? And so if you are someone who has been told before that you speak in a sort of monotone way, consider working in these intonations and even practicing them again and again so that they feel more natural to you in order to convey emotion to the audience. Usually, intonation is going to happen quite naturally if you're actually feeling the emotions of your speech and genuinely feeling for the audience. And so, this is going to typically come very naturally, but you need to be aware of what your intonations are conveying to the audience. Bono of U2 said that if he's not feeling the emotion of the lyrics of a song, then he can't hit the notes in that song, and I think there's something to that. Next, let's talk about your rate of speech. Your speaking rate is the pace at which you convey speech. Pretty obvious. Normally, it's 120 to 150 words per minute. Here in the South, we tend to speak a little bit slower, but when we're speaking publicly, our voice can go way faster than we were anticipating, and it's only because we're nervous, and our biological sense is to get off the stage, get out from the spotlight. And so we need to be aware of this. I certainly fall into this tendency of speaking really fast in order to get through my presentation as quickly as possible. So we need to try to convey confidence by taking a deep breath, monitoring our breathing throughout the speech, and making sure that we're talking at a rate that is appropriate to the speech and to our audience's cognitive abilities. If we're talking to kids or older people, maybe speak a little bit slower. And if we're talking to a normal audience, make sure that we're not blasting through the entire thing. You should also pay attention to the audience's reactions because their facial expressions and their body language can tell you a lot about whether or not the rate of your speech is appropriate. So if you're speaking too slowly, we've all had that professor who speaks way too slow in lectures and you're falling asleep by the end because you're a little bit bored, right? So make sure that you speed it up a little bit if you're seeing those bored, sleepy faces. And if you're speaking too quickly, you can confuse the audience because they're trying to keep up with you. So if they're looking confused or just sort of zoning out, then maybe consider slowing down your rate of speech. Now let's talk about strategic pausing. Pauses enhance your meaning by, providing a type of verbal punctuation, emphasizing a point, drawing attention to a thought, and allowing listeners to contemplate a point. So it's basically just allowing some blank space in your speech to let whatever you're saying really sink in with your audience. And speakers and listeners both need these types of pauses because, one, speakers, you can use this not only to emphasize a point, but to catch your breath, right, a little bit and check in with your body and see how it's going. But also, listeners need these pauses in order to, just take a break and absorb what you're saying, and so that you're not going a mile a minute throughout the speech and they feel like they've been taken on a roller coaster. Our next slide goes over pronunciation and articulation. Pronunciation, as you know, is the correct formulation of word sound. This can be especially relevant to us in the South who can pronounce words a little bit weird sometimes or sort of slur our words a little bit. And articulation goes along with this, and it's clarity with which sounds are made. So it's basically enunciation, saying your words clearly and distinctly from one another in order to make sure everyone hears you correctly. Incorrect pronunciation and articulation often distracts audiences, especially pronunciation. If you're saying a word wrong, they're going to be like thinking in their head, is that how you say it? Or is that person wrong, right? And then they likely haven't heard whatever else you're saying. They haven't gotten the real meaning of your speech. And in terms of articulation, if all of your words are sort of running together, then your audience is going to maybe zone out or maybe not even understand a word you're saying. So this lack of articulation often comes with speaking too quickly. So slow down and really take your time a little bit when you're saying your words and bump up that articulation, that enunciation when you're speaking publicly. Now let's talk about your body and delivery, something that is difficult to control, especially when you're starting out public speaking, because you don't necessarily feel in your body as much. You're feeling really in your head because you're nervous, you're trying to remember everything, and it seems all cognitive. But practicing your delivery methods of your body language and your gestures and things like that helps you to feel more confident. So let's get going, starting with body language. This includes facial expressions, your eye behavior, your gestures, and just general body movements. This body language includes your animation. Mostly what we're talking about with animation is smiling, but they can be a range of facial expressions, like you can convey sadness or more somberness without a smile, and you can laugh and you can look contemplative. These are all the kinds of things that you run through in your speech in order to make your face more animated and more entertaining to the audience. But smiling is especially important because it's a sign of mutual welcome at the start of your speech. If you're smiling and you look happy and friendly, then your audience is more likely to trust what you have to say. Mutual comfort and interest, if you throw in a smile every once in a while, or not even a full, big teeth smile, if you look relatively happy and energetic during the speech, then your audience is going to, again, feel more comfortable with you and what you're saying. And lastly, there's mutual goodwill. At the close of your speech, if you look happy and excited that you just relayed this information to them, then of course they're going to find your ethos as a speaker to be more genuine and welcoming. And also, smiling aids in your relaxation and improves your confidence. So our brains are kind of dumb. For as smart as they are, they're a little bit dumb. And so usually smiling is used as a way to trick your body into feeling happy and more confident in yourself. Let's now talk about your eye contact during a speech. Eye contact, as you probably know, is extremely important. You've probably experienced really good eye contact from a speaker before, perhaps by a professor, and it can feel very powerful and empowering both to the speaker and to the audience member if you're able to make engaged eye contact with them. And it feels like you're talking directly to the audience, right? So on that note, it maintains the quality of directness in your method of delivery. It lets people know that they are recognized, that you're not just talking to a wall, basically, that you're talking to actual living beings. It indicates acknowledgement and respect for the audience, and it shows you consider your listeners unique people. They're not just an audience, they're a group of people who all have different ideas about what you're saying. And so if you're able to talk directly to them and perhaps rest on their eyes, every once in a while, then they go out of the presentation feeling special and acknowledged, etc. Now let's talk about gestures. Physical gestures can often fill in the gaps of your message. They can often illustrate the size or the shape of an object, and they can express depth of emotion, right? If you're feeling extra strong about something or somber about something or overwhelmed about something, all of these types of gestures can help you convey those emotions along with your pitch and intonation and the actual content of your message. It's all going to work together. And so just that little thing I did, it's all going to work together, right? That happens sort of naturally, and this type of thing takes a lot of practice. If you're more aware of them, then perhaps you use more hand gestures. But these should arise from genuine emotions, so it's going to have to feel natural to you, and it's going to have to match the emotion that you're saying. But it should also conform to your personality. So if you're not a loud personality who uses boisterous voice tactics and large hand gestures normally, then maybe make your hand gestures a little bit more subtle. Trying to get into frame for y'all. Typically, open hand gestures present you as more vulnerable, whereas downward hand gestures present you as more domineering, right? So be aware of that. But always your hand gestures should feel genuine. It helps to practice these a lot if you're not a person who typically speaks with their hands. Moving on to nonverbal immediacy, which might not be a word you've heard before. I think we touched on it very early in the semester, but not a whole lot. So nonverbal immediacy is perceived physical and psychological closeness between the speaker and the audience, between the audience themselves. This makes listeners respond more positively if they feel more close to you, both psychologically and physically, and it helps listeners to learn more. This has been studied a lot in instructional communication, and so when I was learning to be a TA and doing those trainings, we talked a lot about how immediacy can help you become a better teacher because students are more likely to listen to you, to connect with you if they feel more psychologically close to you. So even in a virtual class like this where we've never met in person, we're all doing our best to form a connection between our students and between ourselves so that the discussion in class is a little bit better, so the learning in class is a little bit easier, and so that we come out of this class having good educational professional relationships with all of you. So this in turn has to do with public speaking because if we can immediately foster that sense of nonverbal immediacy, even in an asynchronous presentation, even in a virtual presentation where you're not in the same room with your audience, this can really help to up your ethos again as a speaker and just make your audience feel more comfortable with you, more engaged with you, and all that good stuff. And of course, we have to talk about our dress or our attire as public speakers. Unfortunately, attire is the first thing your audience is going to notice. It's just kind of human nature to find the speaker who's going to be talking to you and check out their clothing, their hair, their makeup, their physical appearance in general. And it's sad that humans immediately go to this type of judgment about a person, but it's just what we do. We are visual people, and we're going to judge a speaker before they get up. So obviously you want to meet the audience's expectations to a certain extent in terms of how professional you're dressed, how formal you're dressed, how appropriate your dress is. So that's all critical criteria for determining if your dress is appropriate. Make sure that you're meeting the audience expectations in terms of formality, and you're considering the nature of the speech's occasion. So if it's a more professional setting, maybe bump it up, be business professional or business casual. If it's a classroom setting that's really casual, then maybe wear your normal clothes. Our last slide of the day has to do with how you practice your delivery. Practice is essential to effective delivery, usually because all of our movements and all of our voice details can be a little bit different when we're speaking publicly than when we're interacting with people in everyday life. So more practice, of course, leads to greater comfort when delivering a speech, and you should practice with a fully developed outline. Remember again that we want to practice like we play. So, some good tips are to focus more on the message of your speech, and also, every once in a while check in with your delivery, make sure it's genuine, make sure it's visually stimulating. You should plan ahead and practice often. You should focus on your speech's ideas. That way you can really tap into the emotions that you might feel during the speech and that you want to convey to your audience. And you should time each part of your speech and then put it all together. Make sure that each time limit that you're giving to the speech is within the good range, whether that be for an assignment, right? Your speech has to be 3 to 5 minutes, or if you're practicing a toast for a wedding, you don't want to go too long and bore the audience. Or if you're only going to have 30 minutes to give a presentation at a meeting at your company, then make sure that you're well within that 30 minutes and, budgeting time for introductions and questions at the end, stuff like that. So these are all things that you need to consider when you're practicing a speech. Thank you all for listening. Again, this was our Module 9 lecture over delivery. We went over the 4 methods of delivery, how your voice should sound in your delivery, and how your body should look and what it should do in delivery. So it was a whole lot. Again, the key here is to practice and to try to fake that confidence until you're actually feeling confident in your delivery. So let me know if you need any help with that, and I will see you guys soon.